Good morning. Today is Friday, October 13th, 2023. The simple way to read the beginning of the Torah, Bereishit bara Elokim, in the beginning, God created. And then there is a list, a serial list of what was created by God. First, Shamayim va'aretz, heaven and earth, light and dark. Each day, the different things that God created on that day, ending with the sixth day of creation, Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve. So it's a list. In the beginning, God created A, B, C, D, etc., till we get to human beings, and then comes Shabbos. The Ramban asks, that can't be true. Because if that was true, it should have said, Berishona, first, God created heaven and earth. Second, light and darkness. Third, right? If you have a serial list, it goes first, second, third. In the beginning is not followed by second, it would be followed by later. There would be the beginning, and then later, or the end, which we don't find in the text of the Torah. We only find this word, Bereishit. And so the Ramban explains, Bereishit bara Elokim es hashamayim ve'es haaretz. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. That is what God created. That's the Bria. Today, we would call that the Big Bang. One sudden, single moment, before which there was nothing, only God, and after which there was everything designed and willed by God. Everything at one moment. But the substance of what God created at that moment was not a finished world as we know it. Rather, God created what the Ramban calls koach hiluli, primordial matter. I understand that to be atomic particles. That was all at one moment. That's Bereishit bara. One moment, all of the particles, all of the material is made. That's in the beginning. And then God manipulated those existing particles into different combinations and shapes to evolve, according to God's will, into water and plants and animals, and finally into human beings. Listen to the words of the Ramban. HaKadosh Baruch Hu bara kol hanivroim ma'asif u'muchlakes. God created everything in the world at one defined moment. That's the first pasuk. Bereishit bara Elokim es hashamayim ve'es haaretz. Everything is there. Hotzi mino efes hagamor. Before that moment, there was absolutely nothing besides God. Hamuchlet yesod dak ma'od. There was at that moment some kind of substance that was very, very small, fine, matter, material. Again, I would call it atomic particles. Avolhu koach mamsi, and these particles, this matter, had the potential to then be fashioned by God into all of the things that God created. The achar hiluli, after that first moment, Bereishit bara Elokim es hashamayim va'aretz, lo bara davar. God didn't create anything else new, meaning there's one moment where God creates all the material, Then creation is over. On the first day, the first moment, creation is over. Now there's a second process. And the second process is God taking the matter that God had created from nothing at one moment, and then over the next 6 days, fashioning it into all of the different differentiated objects and items and things in this world. After this initial Big Bang creation of all matter, God didn't create anything else. Aval, rather, hu yotzar va'asa. He fashioned, he manipulated, he took the material and made it into finished products. Ki mimenu hamsu hakol, v'hilbish hatzuros, v'tikein osam. From that initial matter, God fashioned everything, clothed everything in a form, and fixed everything into its final appearance. I find it fascinating that the Ramban, writing in the 13th century, is describing an evolutionary process of creation, but with the proviso, it began ex nihilo, from nothing, only God, at one moment, by God, and with God's design. So it's interesting that, according to the Ramban, the Torah's account of creation matches a certain version of evolution, which was only conceived centuries later. Okay. That's very interesting, but the Torah is not a work of science. The Torah is not trying to teach us science. So what spiritual lesson do we gain from this evolutionary process of creation? Why do we need to know this? Rabbi Yaakov Neuberger suggests that we can understand this based on other writing of the Ramban. So, what the Ramban is saying, let's be clear, is that this Big Bang moment created everything, but in potential. It was only in the form of raw material. So, at this moment of Bereishit bara, this one single act of creation of all matter, but it was entirely in potential, not in actuality, until God would fashion it into the different things that it would be. But without that further fashioning and forming and combining and crafting, the world would be absolutely meaningless. It would just be matter. It would just be raw material. It had to evolve through God into the magnificent and majestic world. But at the same time, here's the point, it was there already. One act of creation. And this presages the spiritual life and growth of every single one of us. And just to use one example, we see this very clearly later on in the book of Bereishit. Our sages tell us that Avram Avinu, our patriarch Avraham, faced 10 tests in his lifetime. The 10th and most difficult test was the Akedah, the binding of Isaac. God commanded him to offer his son. Now that passage opens with the words, V'helakim nisa es Avraham. God tested Avraham. That was the 10th, and there were 9 other tests before that. But what's the purpose of these tests? I mean, Doesn't God already know what Avraham would do? Doesn't God already know whether Avraham will pass or fail a given test? Why does God test Avraham if God already knows the response? So the Ramban writes that spiritual life, our spiritual life, is catapulted. It can leapfrog forward through nisyonos, through tests, which are intended to force us to draw on strengths and blessings that have been ours, that are within us, but are so far unrealized to the extent that we don't even know that we have them. So we grow primarily by looking inside ourselves when faced with a challenge, identifying our gifts, and challenging ourselves to test them. We advance spiritually by building with confidence on the tested and now recognized powers. Meaning I have a certain ability within me, but I've never had the opportunity to express it, to apply it. So I may not even know that I have it. Along comes a test, and it requires me to look within myself to find some strength, resilience, courage, whatever it may be, to be able to meet this. And I may never have thought that I had this ability within me because it was never called for. So it was there, but it was dormant. It was in potential. And now, because of this test, I have got to bring this from the potential into the actual. That's what allows me to advance, because after I've been tested, yes, of course, I could fail. Yes, that happens. But if I pass a test, then I have this new element that I've learned about myself that I already had, but simply never had the opportunity to bring from the potential to the actual. So now that it is brought into the actual, I am spiritually catapulted forward. I now know that I have the ability to do something that I never knew that I had. And for us to be able to work on catapulting, advancing our spiritual abilities, to take our personal potential strengths and bring them to the fore, this is the core and the mandate of our spiritual growth and accomplishment that we are here for. So the tests that God gave Avraham were not for God. God knew the reaction. God knew what the result of the test would be. The test was for Avraham to be able to discover that he had a faith and certainty in God's words that Avraham himself might not even have realized he had before he was required to call upon them. And he did. And he and his descendants, for all time, including us, live in light of the spiritual growth that Avraham realized in taking that latent potential strength of his and bringing it into the actual world. So the opening pasuk of the Torah introduces us to God's process, which will challenge and guide us throughout the rest of the Torah, throughout the rest of the life, and by which the world is created, and by which in our own lives we can grow. God is certainly testing us today. I do not know and would not dare to presume why it is God's plan for this war in Israel to happen, especially in such a hideous, horrible, savage manner. But make no mistake, we, the Jewish people, are certainly being tested. Each one of us in different ways. Some of our brothers and sisters in Israel are being tested with military heroism, with seeing the butchery of Hamas and remaining professional and on task. An incredible test. Some are being tested with sending their loved ones to the front with faith and resilience. And here, some with staying in touch with our family and friends and those we know in Israel, showing them our support, donating much needed funds, prayer every hour, engaging in extra Torah study and the performance of extra mitzvos as a merit. And another area in which we are being tested, and this will become more serious, I predict over the next few days, we are being tested with publicly combating the outrageous lies of the enemy so that the world remains on task to see the barbarity of Hamas and the necessity of what Israel is doing, while Israel does try to the best of its ability to reduce civilian casualties, but to see that Hamas must be removed. And I would say, for all of us, remaining united as Klal Yisrael, feeling connected to each other, regardless of our political beliefs, regardless of our religious practices, regardless of our cultural orientation, that every single one of us feels the pain and the inspiration of every other one of us. We are being tested in many, many ways, these and more. Every one of us is tested in life in multiple ways, in different ways. And this process of having to rise to the occasion, finding a strength or a resolve within us that we did not know that we had, and in the process by which God helps us create ourselves, just as God created everything else. Jodi Picoult, the well-known author, wrote, "Who we are isn't so much about what we do, but rather what we are capable of when we least expect it." God creates the world in this way in order to teach us what to expect in life and how to make use of everything that happens to us, especially now. My friends, I wish you a good day. Together with all of us, we wish safety and peace in Israel. I hope for you and for me a Shabbat Shalom, a Shabbos of peace somehow. And I look forward to seeing all of you soon in person.